As the 20th century, video games have becoming a popular way for both children and adults to pass time. I myself play video games, and I won't doubt that many of the viewers play video games too. As of recently, though, there's been a rise of people, especially parents, who seem to have been noticing a rising trend, and that trend is between specifically violent video games, and that people who play them are probably more prone to becoming violent themselves. Hello, my name is Brock Delahunt, and I'll be demonstrating why violent video games themselves do not cause players to become violent, but rather studies fail to take into account other outside factors that could play into an increase violent tendencies in the players. When it comes to studying video games and how they affect the temperament of players and how it's done and what they're looking for, Mark Griffiths, in his meta-analysis, labels just a few methods in which scientists find these results and what they are looking for when they take these studies. And when these researchers do these studies, they are looking, or when they're looking, or what these researchers are looking for when they conduct these studies, is that they're looking for stereotypical aggressive behavior. So, name calling, pushing, shoving, as this could also later on become violent behavior. And violence or aggression and behavior, or aggression and violence are both different, as aggression is a more broad term and violence is a more specific term for high-end aggression, as aggression or violence is always aggression, but aggression isn't always violence. For the methods that Mark Griffiths has mentioned being the most common, there's the self-report method, which involves a study group self-reporting to a researcher when they feel they have becoming more aggressive while or after playing a video game. And then there's the observation method, which researchers, parents, or other trusted adults will watch, typically young children, during and after playing a video or violent video game to see how they behave and then record what they see. And you might be wondering, what have researchers found since they do all these studies? And what does the evidence basically show? Has there been a increase in violence? In a meta-analysis by Anderson and his colleagues, they have shown a correlation in violent video games and short-term aggressive behavior. But this short-term aggressive behavior is comparable to short-term aggression behavior you'll see in people who watch violent TV shows and movies. In an article by the Bredikina talks about the topic of violent video games and aggressive behavior. They have noted that aggressive behavior is also, or this aggressive behavior is also seen across different genres of game. So, different genres of game mean different types of video games. So not just violent, but also competitive or calming games. And after talking about the data, you might be wondering how reliable are these studies, since I mentioned before that these studies don't really take into account outside factors. And Nazish and his associates also doubt that violent video games cause violent tendencies in their player into players, but rather the violent tendencies are caused by outside factors, which these studies don't take into account. Nazish and his associates specifically name factors like mental health, domestic or drug abuse, and just the person's general upbringing as possible factors into play on their violent tendencies. Griffiths, in his meta-analysis, is also mentioned again that this is also mentioned that these studies only show a short-term aggression. So these aggressive outbursts aren't being taken out to the real world, but rather shortly after or during playing a violent video game. And he also notes that these studies are also kind of flawed in the fact that they don't really have a diverse age range, as most of these studies groups are being taken with young children and don't take into account to older demographics. Huseman also adds on to this doubt of video games causing violence by mentioning that around this time of where people are studying the trend between violent video games and violent tendencies in players, that although there was a rise in children, specifically children, playing violent video games, there was a decrease in people playing, there's a decrease in youth violent crime rates. In conclusion, this topic still needs to be significantly looked at, this topic still needs to be significantly looked at, or more in depth, as it needs a more wide range of, more wide range of age groups to be looking at. It also needs a more broad study, also taking the fact that it needs to count for mental health, domestic and drug abuse, and how the person was raised, as those play more of a factor in how someone expresses aggressive behavior. But as we know now, the data we have shows no concrete evidence that violent video games turn into violence, or in turn their players violent.